Good afternoon. I recently finished reading a book called Doorman Wanted by Glenn R. Millar. The main character, Henry, has just inherited a major fortune from his father, and this is somewhat troubling to Henry because he and his father had a really rocky kind of relationship, and it was largely because of the origins of his father's wealth. Like, he and his father didn't really see eye to eye on a lot of issues. Like, growing up, Henry was uncomfortable with where his father's money had come from. Like, even though he'd sort of built up this like big business, a lot of it came from his business's less than ethical business practices. Like, they might not have been breaking the law, but they were doing things that were, well, I guess not really good and not treating people well. And Henry didn't really like that, so he didn't really want to be associated with that fortune. So he ended up moving like all the way across the country. Like, his father lived in New York, whereas he went all the way to California, and instead of getting a job like with his father's construction and building related stuff, like, he ended up getting a job at a homeless shelter, I think it was, and pretty much making himself a completely different kind of person from who he perceived his father to be. So now he is faced with suddenly having control of all that money, and he's not entirely sure what to do with it or how he feels about it. So the story begins when he goes to New York to basically go through the paperwork required for this really fancy apartment building that he has gotten as part of his inheritance. And when he arrives at the building to like sign stuff and get the keys for his new penthouse, he sees an advertisement for the doorman of the building, and he sees this as his opportunity to kind of put off his trying to figure out what he wants to do next. So he ends up taking the job as the doorman and steps into this position at the apartment without anyone there actually knowing. So there's a lot of stories going around the apartment about who this really mysterious young new owner is. But no one knows that it's actually him, and in this fake persona he creates for himself as the doorman, like, he begins to learn about the different people who live in this apartment building, to build relationships with the people who live here, and also to connect with some of the homeless people that often frequent the street outside. So let's see. Something I liked about this story, I think it did a good job at discussing some of the challenges and misconceptions, I think, regarding like the homeless population. Is definitely a character group I think you don't necessarily see talked about quite as often, and I appreciated that it tried to highlight some of the complexities. Like, for instance, this one person that he ends up building a kind of friendship with, like, turns out to, even though he's homeless, he's actually really educated about art, and he has his own ways to acquire like materials and to work on art pieces that he sells to people who visit New York and stuff. Like, there's a lot more going on, I guess, than people often suspect, I think, when it comes to dealing with the people that you just see out on the street. And I do appreciate like the way this story goes into those details and introduces a lot of these kinds of characters. But something I did not like, it felt a little bit like reading the story felt more like social commentary and story format as opposed to reading an actual story. And I think it's because like, even though he has like conversations with people, it often didn't really feel like a conversation. Like, it was more like, so this is an I point of view story, and it's like him reporting on what these people say, and like what these other people say tell you a lot about them, but you don't actually get a particularly deep or complex picture of the main character. Like, it seems more like he's, I don't know, making observations about these people that he interacts with, but not really getting into the nitty-gritty of that relationship himself. Like, for instance, you get this really poignant account, I guess, from this old lady who mentions this one time when she saw a homeless person get hit by a car and lying on the street, and everyone just sort of walked around them and like pretended that they didn't see what happened, as she herself didn't call 911. Like, it wasn't until this one lady in the restaurant she was at noticed and called 911 and berated her and her friend for having done nothing that she stopped to wonder about herself and like why she had chosen not to act, even though it was a humane thing to, well, call an ambulance and see if the person was okay. Like, these kinds of snippets on the characters he interacts with, I feel like manage to build like nice complex pictures of the people around him. But for the main character himself, you get very little of that. Like, even though it says like his bad relation with his father on the whole money origin thing seems kind of shallow, like the only memory he really talks about in regards to why he feels that way was, because some friends like made some comment about how he should feel bad about it because his father wasn't ethical. But it doesn't really go into any like deep thinking on his part, on his own experiences and his own beliefs or where they came from. Like, for instance, I would have liked to hear more about his work at the shelter before he came to New York. I mean, like, I would have expected those kinds of experiences to have more of an impact on his character, but instead, most of the actions he takes in the story seem to reflect someone who comes from a really moneyed background and doesn't actually have a lot of exposure to other stuff. Like, his first recourse when solving problems generally seems to be to try to throw money at it. So it just feels like the main character didn't actually have a lot of depth, and that translated to the story not really feeling as much like a story as it could have, especially for an eye point of view, because I think you would have expected to get a little bit more about like who he was and how he came to believe the things that he believed.